Thank you for being here. It's been a long day at this last session, but as I mentioned this morning, the Wilkes Center has been working, especially with the Gardner Policy Institute, to help establish the Olympic Research Center on campus. It's a really exciting opportunity, but there's a lot of things to consider, from science to economics to finance, transportation, you name it. With a mega event like that, we have many dimensions to cover. That's why I'm so glad we have 4 really distinguished panelists today. And what we're going to do is we will invite each panelist to come up one by one. I will introduce each of them as they come up. And they'll get 5 minutes to give a short presentation. And then we'll do a panel discussion and audience Q&A. Okay, so the first panelist is Dr. Peter Veals. And Peter is a colleague of mine in atmospheric sciences. He is a research associate professor at the U and holds a PhD from our department as well from the U. And I know his office often crammed with instruments. He does a lot of cool measurements, and he has done thunderstorm research in the tropics, improving weather radar on commercial airlines, lake effect snow, sea effect snow in Japan, and orographic snow in the Wasatch, so lots of snow. But also thought seeding, and you'll see that's a very important research topic for the next speaker as well. But he can often be found coding up new forecasting tools on weather.utah.edu. If you want to geek out on weather, that's a fantastic website, weather.utah.edu. Fixing cranking instruments in the middle of a blizzard. We're out exploring the many landscapes of Utah. So please join me in welcoming Peter.
All right, thanks everybody for having me. Appreciate you sticking it out at the end here.
It's down.
All right, cool. So yeah, I figured, worthwhile topic to kind of kick this whole thing off is just to kind of discuss the future of snow in the West, because we need snow in the West to have the Olympics in 2034. So, of course, before you talk about what's happening locally, you have to talk about what's happening globally. So, this figure shows the global average temperature for the last 200 years. You can see, barely works in there. Okay. Anyway, you can see the last couple of years we're up to about 1.2, 1.3 degrees Celsius of warming above pre-industrial times. And that will likely spike quite a bit for 26 and 27 because of the El Nino coming. That's often when you see these spikes. And then this is what each of those bars represents, right? Like you just take the whole Earth, you take all these temperatures, and you would average every pixel in this picture to get your global average temperature. So you can see, a lot of these places, including the American Southwest, are warming a lot. Almost everywhere is warming. But an average is obviously composed of a lot of different numbers. So of course, you have a few places like, you look at India, maybe not warming less than the global average. But of course, a lot of people don't understand an average, and so you'll get somebody in each of these places. Someone online is going, well, it didn't warm here, right where I am at this one point. So that's often something that we'll be continuing to deal with is lack of understanding averages. And then here's what's been on the whole driving that is this human emissions of both fossil fuels and also releasing greenhouse gases from the way we use the land as well. And so you can see that's been rising, those emissions have been rising really quickly. One of the things that's really key in kind of our future and what things look like further into the future is when these emissions peak and then when they start coming down. So one of the things that's really important is, we haven't even peaked yet. Like we're still emitting more greenhouse gases each year than we did the year before. And so once that peaks, that's a big milestone for humanity, and then the other big milestone is when we get down to net zero. And so here's what that looked like in the atmosphere, liberating that much CO2 and greenhouse gases in that amount of time. really put us above anything that's really been experienced, including these periods of ice ages and warm periods over the last 800,000 years. There's still not been anything even close to the concentrations that humans have driven us into for CO2. So now, globally, that's what's going on. Now, what's been happening in the West? What have we seen so far from warming in the West? And so, of course, this guy right here, one of these sites, I should back up. This is change in April 1st snowpack. So you can see most of the sites around the West, the brown dots are a decrease in the April 1st snowpack. So most of these sites are losing snow. A few of them, though, of course, a few of these sites, most of them being these high elevation or kind of drier sites, can for a time benefit from a warmer atmosphere that holds more water vapor in these places that are moisture starved. And this, of course, is one of those. This, of course, is one of those sites, and this is another person at this site telling you that just because it didn't decrease in their one spot, that you shouldn't believe the other 95% of the spots that were decreasing. And then the change in the start of the melt season. Most of the sites we are melting out quite a bit earlier. So many of the sites in the West are melting out 20 days earlier than they used to melt out before humans started doing this stuff. So then what does our future look like? And I like this diagram. This is from the IPCC 6th assessment, because it kind of shows you that we have control over our future as humans. So, this bottom scenario, so this is, sorry, I should back you up. This is the amount of warming that's been happening up until this point, or up until the assessment was written. And so you can see it's warmed quite a bit. You're over 1 degree Celsius. And then these 6 tabs are different emission scenarios. So at the bottom here is the very low emission scenario. That would be if we peaked today, if our emissions peaked today, and then by a little after 2050, we got to net zero. I think that looks like 2060 or so. And then the low emission scenario, we peak today also, but then we get down to zero a lot later, and then so on and so forth. You can see where these peaks are and sort of the halving of emissions. So, as far as what we've done so far, we've basically baked in some more warming, right? Like the greenhouse gases we've emitted so far have baked in more warming for us. But what will be key is what humanity does, how soon we can peak our CO2 emissions to get them down, and that will kind of affect our future in 2050 and beyond, where the fate isn't just baked in. So what does this look like in Utah? So now that you've kind of seen those different emission scenarios, and you can see we're already at 1 degree Celsius. So this figure shows the fraction of rain versus snow in the Wasatch. So the fraction of your wintertime precipitation that falls as rain versus snow. So at 1 degree Celsius, we've driven somewhere around say a 10% increase in the fraction of rain versus snow in the Wasatch at these lower elevations. The upper elevations are still in pretty good shape there. But then you can see as you move forward to a 2C of warming or 3C, you can see you really start to get a lot of rain at the low and mid elevations in the Wasatch. And I think this is going to be key for discussing the fate of the Olympics in Utah, because Soldier Hollow, you can't move it any higher per Olympic regulations. You can't have a venue be much higher in elevation just for sort of athlete performance. So you can see if I think we're okay for 2034 just because of the time involved, but for future Olympics, I think this figure is really relevant because that will kind of dictate what we do as a species, will dictate whether or not the Olympics will really be viable in Utah in the next games after 2034. So the kind of consequences of this for the ski industry and for the Olympics, of course, are more rain events, earlier meltouts, fewer periods for snowmaking. This winter was a great example of this. And then fewer seasons where these low elevations are skiable. And of course, the high elevation resorts and spots will become more valuable. So that's all that I have just for a primer on kind of where we are in terms of the weather and the climate perspective on the 2034 Olympics.
Thank you, Peter. So next, Our next panelist is Jonathan Jennings. So Jonathan is a meteorologist and cloud seeding program manager at the Utah Division of Water Resources. Jonathan earned his Bachelor of Science degree in meteorology from Penn West University. He currently serves as program manager of SNOWSEEP, Utah's landmark multi-agency research initiative advancing the scientific validation of cloud seeding through cutting-edge observational instrumentation and atmospheric modeling, which I know Peter has been very much involved in as well. And when I thought about a good panelist for this panel, I wanted someone who worked in science, but also all the way into water management. So I thought Jonathan would be a perfect person for that. So please join me in welcoming Jonathan.
Thanks, John. All right, that was a great introduction. Thank you for that, John. One thing I think about when I think about the Winter Olympics is lasting legacy. And I think something back in 2002 that Utah did really well is created that lasting legacy. And as we move into 2034, cloud seeding is going to be part of that lasting legacy. And it has been in Utah since 1974. So what exactly is cloud seeding? No, we're not talking about jet contrails or chemtrails. We're talking about actual science. So this is a diagram that shows what cloud seeding is, and it's the act of introducing favorable nuclei into an already existing and already precipitating cloud to enhance precipitation. Here in Utah, we focus on the mountain ranges, our high elevation snowpack, where 95% of our water resources derive from. One of the reasons we cloud seed in Utah is the variability. So here we're looking at the historic April 1st percent of normal snow water equivalent. So that's typically when we peak. And over the past 31 years, we've only fallen within 5% of normal, or average, 4 times, or 10% of normal 8 times. So we have very high variability. And just 3 years ago, as I think we'll see with Caroline, you'll see how different the snowpack looked in 2023 versus what it is now. So here's a good look at some of our target areas. Again, we focus on those high elevation snowpack. We have a few areas where we're conducting drone cloud seeding, but the state has a very strong regulatory framework in place that allows us to make sure that our operators are licensed, permitted, and qualified to conduct the operations. We have a really nice cost share program with local water conservancy districts, as well as lower Colorado River Basin states. So those lower basin states send upwards to $500,000 annually to the state of Utah to conduct cloud seeding in our Colorado River Basin. And we have very strong legislative support. After the 2022 Great Salt Lake hitting record low levels, we saw our cloud seeding budget go from $350,000 annually to now ongoing $7 million. And we've also received about $18 million in one-time funding to help do research like Snowscape, but also to modernize our program, build drones, and build better and more efficient ground-based generators. So some of those operations, what they look like, on the left there, that's one of our remotely operated ground-based generators using silver iodide as the primary nucleating agent, which freezes at the -5°C level. But we could be much more precise with drones. We could actually fly these drones directly into the cloud. They have the capabilities to survive in very strong icing conditions and disperse materials directly into that super cold cloud layer where droplets are not freezing. They're still in the liquid form. But also down in Emory County, we have a program there using liquid propane. So when you evaporate liquid propane, it creates a burst of evaporational cooling. And everything from -40°C to almost as warm as 0°C freezes. The issue with that, it has to occur inside the cloud and the dispersion isn't as great. So something for like narrow canyons or possibly ski runs could be where you use the liquid propane seeding. So one of the toughest things we deal with is evaluating our programs. We have a pretty strong statistical framework dating back to 1974 showing roughly a 6 to 12% increase in precipitation. But a lot of these control sites that we've used are now part of our target sites, and we've gone beyond the climatic periods. So we're having to find new ways to evaluate our program, and that's where Snowscape comes into play. So Snowscape, I see Peter, I see Alyssa, and I see Paul Brooks. We're all part of this project, and I thank them for their efforts. But this is really a big collaborative effort from the federal level to the state level, down here to the university level, and then of course private industry. So the whole idea behind Snowscape was to create a high observation or high resolution observational network across the snow basin ski area. So we had X-band weather radars in the Antelope Island Causeway extending to the northwest towards Powder Mountain, or northeast towards Powder Mountain. And we just littered that with as much instrumentation as we could put out there. And we used that data to go in and frame or train weather forecast models to be able to look at the simulation of cloud seeding impacts. So it's still a model. There's still assumptions made in models, just like there are in statistics. But we just don't have the infrastructure in place to do radar physical validation everywhere just yet. Our contractor Rainmaker were successful this past season in being able to physically validate about 84 different storms in the Bear River Basin, which gives us a lot of hope moving forward, knowing that cloud seeding certainly does work. Just to clear up a few misconceptions there, I'll leave those bullets up there for a second. If you guys have more particular questions on those, I could take them afterwards. But yeah, thanks for having me today.
So unfortunately, our next panelist, Eric Alvarez, couldn't be with us today. So we have amazing pinch hitter, who is Nate Lloyd, sort of Eric's co-worker at the Kentucky Gardner Policy Institute. So I think Nate just found about this morning. So really thank Nate for coming here. So Nate is the Director of Economic Research at the Gardner Institute. He's an applied economist with a background in data analytics, statistical modeling, and economic research. Before his work at the Gardner Institute, he worked at Western Governors University, Zions Bank, Federal Reserve Board of Governors. And he holds a dual BSBA degree in economics and political science and an MS degree in economics from Utah State University. So please join me in welcoming Nate.
Thank you, John. And you know, I don't like to be a pinch hitter necessarily, but I'll do my best and at least try to get a base hit, I guess. And John, thank you for having me. We're looking forward to our future collaboration with the Olympic Research Center. We've done a number of Olympics-related reports, and I've been involved with a few of these. And we'll continue to do these as we lead up to 2034, really focus on the economics of the Olympics. So, so we did a study of the 2002 Olympic Games that we hosted, and we found that there was about $4.3 billion in spending that took place. And this was largely the organizing committee and their expenditures, but it was also some federal dollars that were attracted to the games. This was, if you remember, right after 9/11, and we received some security funding for that benefited the economy here locally. So we have to kind of, in our modeling, take out some of that, which is the $1.2 billion up there. And so really net new spending that took place in our state was that $3.1 billion figure. And then with input-output modeling, we're able to figure out what were the kind of induced effects and indirect effects of all that spending. So when we talk about induced effects, we're talking about people and their employees and their wages that they're receiving as a result of those expenditures. When we're talking about indirect effects, we're talking about the businesses in the supply chain. And so the software is able to help us calculate these out for multiple rounds of spending until they approach zero. There's leakages every round due to taxes or due to money leaving the state. And our software helps us calculate these really until that approaches zero. And we're able to figure out that, okay, we can now estimate what were the actual impacts of the games. And there's no single measure that's perfect for economic data and economic impacts, So we report out a number of economic indicators to kind of triangulate what the impacts of the games were. So you can see the 3.1 in net new spending led to about 7.5 billion in total spending in our state. And it supported 45,000 job years. These are temporary jobs, we call them job years. If you divide by, say, 10 years, we're talking about 4,500 new jobs that lasted for about a decade. And then personal income impacts about half of what the output impacts totaled. The Olympic Games were very successful from a number of perspectives. From public safety perspective, they were successful, right? Nothing happened, despite worries of, right on the heels of 9/11, and so they were safe. Also, they were, managed well from a fiscal perspective, and there was a surplus at the end of the games. That surplus went to a number of things, but one of those things that it endowed the Utah Olympic Legacy Foundation, which was able to then be the steward for the primary venues since 2002. So Soldier Hollow, Olympic Park, and the Olympic Oval. And these have been preserved using the endowment and other funds. Even there's been some public funds to put towards this over time. But the Olympic Legacy Foundation has been able to preserve the venues, which increased the odds of a future bid and helped with the successful capture of the bid on the 2034 games. The Legacy Foundation attracts a lot of visitors. Back when we did this study in 24, there was over 90,000 out-of-state visitors in the prior calendar year, and it's largely just general public using the venues for corporate events, or they're on vacation with their family, and they're going tubing down the hill in Park City. There's so many things you can do at the venues, especially in Park City at Olympic Park, and that was the vast majority of the visitors. But there's also a portion of visitors that are athletes and spectators that are coming because these venues, because they've been kept so well over time, they've attracted events, national competitions, even world championships in various sports related to the Olympics. So fast forward quick, sorry, I'll try to go quicker. The study we did on the 2034 games, you can see has a lower net new direct spending of 2.6 billion. And that's largely due to the fact that the venues are in place, and so there's less capital expenditures needed to put the games on. There's less, construction that needs to happen. It's just here. The infrastructure is here and built out and ready to go, and so there's less spending expected for the upcoming games, but on the same order of magnitude as far as the impacts that we expect to see. Fiscal impacts, a little harder to estimate. There's actually wider kind of uncertainty bounds around these numbers, but about $21 million in net state operating revenue, about $29 million in net local operating revenue, just kind of the public revenues, less public expenditures that are expected as a result of the Olympic Games. So about 50 million total there. Last one, I think this is just to show, if there's anything that I have to share, it's that economic impacts are temporary. The bars here are representing different years. From 2024 up to 2035. The large bar is in 2034, the year of the games. Obviously, this kind of correlates with the actual activity of the games. When the games leave, then a lot of those economic impacts also leave. So What can we do, from a policy perspective to capture, the economic impact while there is attention on the state, on the games, and what can we do to make more of these lasting impacts. So, thanks to Eric.
Our next speaker is Caroline Gleich. And I'll just say that when asked the Olympic Organizing Committee for a suggestion of one athlete who they would recommend for the panel, Caroline was pretty much at the top of the list. I see Darren Hughes there, from the organizing committee, and you'll see why. And you'll probably see when I read her bio. So Caroline is a professional ski mountaineer and here is athlete and activist for the environment and equality. Happy to say she earned her Bachelor of Science right here at the U in anthropology. And Caroline has been on the cover of every major ski magazine in award-winning films and has summited some of the highest peaks in the world. When she's not in the mountains, she's interviewing athletes, elected officials, and others for her podcast, The Caroline Gleich Show, about how sports can change the world. Caroline is a committed activist for social and environmental justice. She's testified to the House and the Senate about how climate change is affecting snow sports. So you can see why we invited her. So please join me in welcoming Caroline Gleich.
When I thought about this prompt about talking about snow sports and climate impacts on snow sports, I wanted to use this as an opportunity to talk about some of the climate impacts in some of the countries that don't have snow sports as we think of them, because mountain communities often have the resources to adapt, but many of the places that I've been in the world, especially in the global south, they are the most vulnerable to climate change. And when I think about the spirit of the Olympics, the coolest part is how it brings together people from all over the world. And so I wanted to bring that spirit into my presentation. So last spring, I had the opportunity to go to Dushanbe, Tajikistan for a global UN conference on glacier preservation. And Tajikistan is a tiny country in Central Asia. But right now, it has warmed already 1.2 degrees Celsius, which is twice the global average. And out of Tajikistan's over 10,000 glaciers, over 1,300 have already disappeared completely. They are the water source for 70 million people. And so I wanted to shine a light on Tajikistan because this is a tiny country that contributes almost nothing to global emissions, and they hosted the world to beg for glacier protection. And next I wanted to talk about Pakistan. It's not a country that probably sends many winter sports athletes to the Olympics, but it has some of the biggest, most beautiful mountains in the world. It's home to several of the world's highest peaks, K2, many over 8,000 meters. And in 2022, I had the opportunity to go there to attempt to climb and ski G2, which is the 13th highest peak in the world. And while we were there, we spent a couple weeks up on the glacier, and on our walk out, we came across this suspension bridge that we had driven across 3 weeks earlier. And this was the beginning of the devastating floods of 2022 that killed 1,700 people, caused $40 billion in damage, and it was driven by these monsoonal rains and glacier melt following this heat wave. 8 million people were displaced in Pakistan. Pakistan has over 7,000 glaciers, and they are also really susceptible to glacier lake outburst floods. And so after this extreme flooding event in 2022, malaria cases went from 400,000 in 2021, the year before, to over 1.6 million malaria cases. It was the worst outbreak since 1973. And again, Pakistan contributes just 0.3% of global emissions, but faces a 15 times higher climate disaster mortality risk than the global average. But Pakistan was able to catalyze the COP27 Loss and Damage Fund, and they were able to get some compensation for this. But it was a really eye-opening, it was a life-defining trip for me to see just how vulnerable people in Pakistan, the 5th most populous nation in the world, are to climate impacts. And then Peru in 2015. The glaciers there are melting incredibly quickly, but when we were going to the mountains, we drove through the town of Yungay. And in the 1970s, a 7.9 earthquake triggered a glacier rock avalanche off one of the peaks. And we drove through this town where 30,000 people had been buried alive from this massive avalanche and flooding. And it shows with the glaciers melting, it's creating these lakes, and these are, at times, this meltwater can release like a dam, and it threatens many people that live downstream from there. So it's like a flash flood on steroids. And they're now only beginning to get better monitoring in place, but in the town of Juarez, in the Cordillera Blanca of Peru, there's 23,000 people in a potential flood path of an outburst. And so one of the things when we think about climate and adaptation is better monitoring. And then this brings me to Chamonix and the Mer de Glace. So this is the Vallée Blanche in Chamonix, and it's the largest glacier in the Alps, and it's losing 6 meters of thickness per year. And in the Alps, there's a book of 100 classic alpine climbs. It was published in 1973. A third of them are now unclimbable in the summer due to rockfall, and 3 have collapsed entirely. So as the big rocks are held together by permafrost and that's melting, it's causing all sorts of infrastructure and other problems with the alpine routes and the climbing, and even some of the lifts, like on the Aiguille de Midi, some of it's this massive tram in Chamonix that goes up 9,000 feet, and they're worried as the permafrost melts, it will affect some of the cables of that. But it brings me to another place in the Alps, which is in Blatten, Switzerland. And they had the monitoring set up for the glacial outburst floods. And last summer, I believe it was, May in 25, they evacuated 300 residents from this town 9 days prior based on an early warning they had set up. And only one shepherd that stayed inside the zone died. And so, I mean, one fatality is still too many, but the monitoring, the science, the evacuation, it really matters for these communities. And now it brings me to Utah. Living through, I've been here for 25 ski seasons, and living through the ski season of 22, 23 compared to 25, 26, it is remarkable to see the difference. And so we did this kind of repeat. These were taken just a few days apart in April of 23 versus April of 26. And both of them are extremes, and that's the thing we're going to see with climate impacts, is we can no longer expect the patterns of the past to be indicators for future weather. And in 22, 23, it was awesome, but it was actually hard to go skiing. Little Cottonwood closed for 4 days. I had neighbors whose roofs collapsed because they couldn't keep up with the snow removal. And it was almost too much at a time. So we need, one bad year doesn't prove anything, but these extremes keep getting worse and worse. And as we're seeing the low snowpack now, and more of the Great Salt Lake exposed, we're seeing the toxic dust that's blown into the Wasatch Front airshed. And Dr. Mackenzie Skiles here, I think, has determined that our ski season ends, I don't know, I think it's 34 days earlier. I need to fact check myself on that. But the dust from the Great Salt Lake hits the snow and it accelerates the melting. And then just the shrinking of the Great Salt Lake itself, that's how we get our lake effect snow. And so as it creates, the way I see it in my mind, and I'm not a scientist, so I have a BS, but I haven't researched this, but it seems like it's creating this really bad feedback loop where, because the Salt Lake is receding so much, we're just not getting the same amount of snow. So we really need to get our lake enough water, and I'm really grateful to be here and to dive into this panel with these other fantastic researchers and scientists today. Thank you all for being here.
Now I'll invite the panelists to come up and join us on stage. I know you're dying to ask questions, so please hold on. I promise we'll get to Q&A. Okay, so I'll take the prerogative and I'll ask the softball questions. This is the Olympics panel. So I'm curious about your personal connection to the Olympics, whether it's a memory you have or just something about the Olympics to start off.
Yeah, so one of the I think core memories for me from the Olympics was actually made this year. I remember all the hype around Lindsey Vonn in the women's downhill, and what ended up happening was Breezy Johnson, her teammate, ended up winning the gold medal, and I just really like that particular outcome. I thought was really poetic and way more realistic in life, right? Like when you're out there like quietly preparing, doing the work, working hard at your discipline, I love to see that kind of a thing rewarded. And so I thought that was a really cool moment for me in the Olympics, was actually seeing Breezy Johnson get the gold medal, despite getting none of the recognition, being like, who is this? Like, we all love the underdog story. I just thought that was really cool.
Okay, I'll do one from the Winter Olympics, one from summer. In the '08 Olympics, I was in college, track athlete at Utah State. I had my own dreams of being in the Olympics that never came close. But watching Usain Bolt win the 100-meter and set the world record with some teammates and friends, it was incredible. And he celebrated at the end, and he could have been even faster. But he had time to even celebrate, slow down and celebrate, and still break the world record. It was incredible. So I'll never forget that. And I guess on the Winter Olympics side, '02 was so fun. I was in high school, and our school had lotteries for you could win different tickets. And I don't know why, maybe others weren't applying, but I won 3 sets of tickets. And it was awesome. So I got to treat my parents and my sister to a couple events, and it was a lot of fun.
Growing up young, I remember always watching the Olympic Games with my mother, and I think part of it was because she had a crush on Scott Hamilton, the figure skater. So I remember seeing him doing backflips. I remember seeing the Kerry Struggs ball. But really, going back to 2 years ago, I was a big fan of mountain biking and doing a lot of mountain biking myself. Seeing Haley Batten win the silver medal was pretty awesome. So that's my moment.
That's cool. I have two. I moved to Utah in 21, so taking my little brother to a concert downtown for the Olympics was really fun. But then the other one is a vicarious memory from my grandma-in-law, my husband's grandmother, and she passed away at 97, but we spent a lot of time with her when she was 95 to 97, and she would, tell us, we'd always ask her about her life, and one of her favorite stories to tell and one of the proudest moments in her life was volunteering in the 2002 Olympics. And to think about living almost a century and looking back at your life and having that be one of the most defining moments, it really shows how meaningful it is to people that live here, and to have the whole world come together in our state and our town. There's a lot of pride.
Yeah, maybe I'll pick on that. On my personal note, I think Nate, you talked about legacy, and Gardner also talked about legacy. So I'm a beneficiary of that because my daughter did a lot of figure skating when she was younger. So we have an amazing facility right here on campus, and then there's the oval. There's so many rinks right here in the valley. Such a unique opportunity. So it's just amazing what kind of legacy the Olympics can be. Okay, so I'm going to sort of switch gear now and pick up on your presentation. So if you had one thing you can do related to climate and climate change impacts of the Olympics, what would you do? Maybe Caroline, do you want to start on your end?
Vote, because there is so much that we can try to do on an individual level, and reducing your single-use plastic, driving an EV, adding solar to your house, or investing in community-scale renewable energy. Those things all make a difference. But we also need systemic change from our decision makers and our elected officials, and we need them to come together and do these things at scale, because we have the solutions and they're very exciting, but we need the political will. So register to vote and make sure you vote in every election for every office from school board to Senate.
For me, I think education is huge. I've grown to be very disappointed in the educational experience that people are getting. The questions and calls that I get all the time referring to chemtrails, or the fact that perhaps weather radars are controlling the weather is just so disappointing to hear that. And I think a lot of that stems from social media. I think social media is just, it needs to be regulated better, and that's where the virus spreads. So education is really big for my part.
So just a couple thoughts. Last in the O2 games, we learned that there's a lot of congestion and traffic that comes with those few weeks. It's a very intense couple of weeks during the games and the Paralympics that follow. And we realized too that those games could be a catalyst for some things happening in our state, and likely helped with some of the public investment and public infrastructure that was put in place in a timely manner before the games happened. Reconstruction of I-80, I-15, widening lanes, things that happened that maybe wouldn't have happened, or maybe they would have happened at a slower pace. And so we've learned, I think we know that now going into the 34 games, that they can act as a catalyst for what we want to see and what we want to have public officials and people rally around to get done in our state. So I know this is not directly answering your question, but we can learn from the O2 games in that way, and think about how they can be a catalyst. Also, just there's time where you can put attention onto different things, right? And there's efforts that people make during the games to highlight sports and sportsmanship, and why not some of these other topics with climate literacy and things like that.
I'm going to go with Caroline too on this. I think also finding friends or family that might have a chance of their mind being changed toward voting toward a climate-friendly candidate is a big one too. So especially if they live in a swing state. So I undertook this effort for the last presidential election where I thought about all the friends and acquaintances I had that were potentially swing voters, that weren't like hardened toward one party or another, that there was a chance of making a difference there, and especially if they lived in a swing state, and tried to reach out to them and said like, hey, can I try to convince you, to vote for policies that are better for the earth. I convinced a few. I had like maybe a 3 out of 20 success rate. So, but if everybody did that, that could really swing an election. So yeah, I think that would be really helpful.
Thank you. I have other questions on my list, but we have a full crowd here, so let's turn to you, the audience. Who has questions? So Ian.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Question about that economic analysis. As a parent that's benefited from the Legacy Foundation, and I spent a lot of time at Olympic Park, like at the ski course there. Have you guys adjusted that for climate change? Because the reality is if we look at what happened this winter with snowpack and projections for the future, there has to be a component towards investing in taking chairlifts up higher, moving ski resorts up higher, and I think that there's a component of your economic analysis. I realize it was Eric's, that you did a great job. I want to give you full credit. You did a really good job. But there's another component, because we have benefited from that investment in 2002. And as we're going into 2034 and doing work in Los Angeles and seeing kind of last minute responses to 2028, we have, this next 8 years to make a difference. And are you guys looking at the climate variable and the need to adjust the ski resorts and maybe move, we couldn't have had a half pipe, for example, at Park City this winter. And Sean White went and built one at the end of the season, up at the top of Jupiter. And so there's things that I think need to go on as a skier, as someone in the ski industry, and then as an atmospheric scientist. I just wonder if you guys have adjusted that analysis.
I would say in general, no. And that's part of the reason we're looking forward to our future partnership with John and others, just to be able to better integrate our economic thinking with what you all know. Also, part of the issue is that we've been fairly short-term in our analyses, and sometimes it's been retrospective. Like our O2 study was after the games, studying after the fact. The 34 analysis, yes, that's forward-looking, but only 8, 9 years, 9 at a time, I guess. But and so we're pretty short-term, to be honest, in our economic modeling, and a lot of these impacts, as we understand it, right, as economists, have a longer runway, and so I think we should get better at that because there's obviously shorter-term impacts that we could be considering. I'll also say we are tracking data for visitors and skiers, and part of our estimates include all the visitor spending that's associated with the Olympic Games and all the out-of-state people. We're expected to have even more visitors, right, than the O2 Games by a large amount. So we need to be carefully thinking about that. That means more congestion, more traffic. I know there was efforts in O2 to ask for a remote workforce during February. If you can work remotely, do it. I think it'll probably be easier now because there's more employers used to that and set up for that. So hopefully we'll see more remote workers during February of 34. Anyways, just a few thoughts there.
Thank you.
I think there was Stephanie had a question back
Yeah,
there.
I have one for Jonathan, actually. So tying Natalie's excellent comments this morning about, thank you. Excellent comments this morning about the importance of communication and your comment about education. Today, I got the question about cloud seeding and does it rob Peter to pay Paul? So how do you communicate what it does do to a non-scientist, and how can we do more of communicating to non-scientists?
Yeah, that's my job in a nutshell at this point, is communication and trying to figure out how to speak to these people. But when it comes to the robbing Peter to pay Paul, the way I handle it, and people respond very well to this, when you look at the total moisture in a cloud, it's only precipitating about 9% of the total moisture. So if we're only taking 10% increase in precipitation, that's 0.9% of the moisture in the cloud. So there's still plenty to go around. But also, a cloud is an open system, so if it's going to deplete moisture and turn into precipitation, as long as moisture advection is happening, it's going to replenish itself with the outside moisture. But also, when you go through a phase change, so cloud seeding, you're either going from water vapor to an ice crystal, or from supercooled liquid water to an ice crystal. That process actually releases heat into the cloud. So just like a hot air balloon, when you start adding more heat to it, it grows more robust and can last longer. So we actually have positive effects downstream than we do negative effects, and that's even backed by a lot of the models. But the second part of your question, I'm learning on the fly, and the first thing is you really want to dig deep into what their interests are and try to figure out what is their main root, what is the problem that they have. And most times when I just start hitting them with what we call the 9 whys, get down to what the root interest is, it's a distrust in government, and I can understand that to a point. So when I recognize that that's part of the issue, then I try to build trust by being more transparent with our process, letting them know exactly what we're doing. And Utah's cloud seeding program is by far the most transparent in the nation, so that helps us a lot.
Thanks very much. Extraordinary discussion. My name is Ray Grant, and I was the artistic director of the arts and culture programs tied to our 2002 games, and then became the executive director of Sundance. So I've got this perspective of both the role that arts and culture played in our 2002 games. We contributed about $365 million to part of that economic development, extraordinary amount. But also after the games, I was visited by German scientists about climate change and whether or not they could have snow in European capitals. So I would just like to encourage the Gardner Institute and the university to not forget the role that artists play in creating a sense of community. It's not lost on me that most people, many people, have come to know about the Great Salt Lake through Spiral Jetty, through an art exhibition. There are some extraordinary environmental artists. And then finally, I just remind the group assembled here that the Olympic Games did not start as sports activities. They started as vast cultural activities. As a matter of fact, dating back to 776 BC, the earliest known text in the entire Greek world was found etched into the shoulder of a terracotta vase. And it was a hexameter poem that read, "He who dances most nimbly of all, take this the vase as your prize." The game started as cultural celebrations. Sport was added centuries later. So I'd encourage all of us that the arts contribute to the environment here and the like.
Can I address that? Because our center, the research center, is called the Wilkes Center for Societal Impact. It's envisioned pretty broadly, and one of the major homes for the center is actually Dean Peter Trappa's sort of merged, no, I shouldn't say that. It's the coordinated colleges, liberal arts and sciences. So that includes the College of Humanities. So we envision humanities to play a very important role. And one of the courses we found, because I dug through the course catalog for Olympics-related courses, is the ancient Olympics, like what you said. So unfortunately, we should move on. Yeah, Sarah had her hand raised as well.
Thank you for the panel and for all the different perspectives here. So there's an organizing committee. 2034 feels far away, but it is going to come very quickly. And there are a lot of subcommittees and probably sub-subcommittees within those committees. What would be one thing each of you would recommend to the organizing committee that would enable us to feel like we are actually addressing climate resiliency as part of the games?
And maybe if I could also broaden the question, I see Darren's there as well. So I'm not going to let Darren off the hook, because he is key member of the organizing committee. So.
Great. Well, then
Yeah, maybe we should invite Darren. Yeah, did you want to take that one to start off?
Yeah, that's. Oh, you want me to? No, I'd love to hear from them.
Yeah.
You're not coming off the list, so we'll go to you after they take the time.
It's funny you mention it. So Jonathan and I are going to be proposing a weather and snow preparedness committee. So everything from forecasting support to ensuring that you have snow. So everything from weather forecasting to snow storage. That's one of the big ways that resorts are making themselves resilient in a warming world. As you pile up all the snow at April of 2033, you pile up all the snow and cover it with insulated blankets, and 60 or 70% of it is left over the next fall when you uncover it. And so that's sort of an example of the spectrum of things that we want to cover in this weather and snow preparedness committee. So,
cool.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Can I ask a question on that? For each, when does it have to be enacted by? Because 8 years is really close and really far away at the same time.
Yeah, so I think ideally we'd be starting preparations in a year or two. I think that would probably be about the right time.
I'll let other experts answer this.
Yeah, this is something Peter and I have been speaking about for probably 3 months or so. Because I think there's solutions at the university level, at the state level, and even the federal level to help make sure that the Winter Olympics in 2034 showcase what truly is the state of Utah, and that doesn't include just snow on the ski runs, that includes the aesthetic that this is a place to come do winter sports at. So we really want to make sure that that's showcased, and part of my interest in that is, of course, the cloud seeding program, but also building a lasting legacy of instrumentation. Weather radar is a major weakness in the state of Utah, and I think we need the weather radar to be able to train some of the forecasting tools that we want to develop. So that's something I'm looking into, is trying to build gap-filling weather radars, and the benefits of that go way beyond the Winter Olympics, way beyond cloud seeding, going into public safety, emergency management, amongst others. So.
And on Jonathan's note of the instrumentation, there was a precedent for this in 2002. So this big monitoring network of weather stations around the country, Meso West, was started out of that. It's run on the University of Utah. And Meso West has provided a many-fold increase, or a many-fold return on that investment in terms of economic activity. Companies were spun out of it, multi-million-dollar companies were spun out of it, out of this, million-dollar investment. So, yeah, that's a great example, like a lasting legacy.
I would say for the committee members, I would imagine many are quite influential, and so to use every lever to encourage, to treat the Great Salt Lake as vital Olympic infrastructure. Because if there's no lake, no snowpack, no games, we need to get water there as soon as possible. And to also use every lever for change to stop expanding fossil fuel extraction in a state that's asking the world to come watch winter.
If you want to add to that?
Can I use the mic? Okay. Hey everybody, is this on? Okay, Darren Hughes, Utah 2034. Thanks for coming. First of all, we're really excited that everyone is so excited about the games coming and all the potential impacts. These are all great ideas, and actually this is a really critical year to have these conversations. It's a 7.5 years to go, I guess, if you look at it, almost 8 years. But it's really critical time to make really good decisions that will yield benefits for us in 2034. A couple of quick comments. First of all, is it not working? Sorry, I'm loud anyway, if that helps. Okay. Oh, yeah, that is much better. Remember, it's our unstated ambition, but hopefully will become a stated ambition quite soon, that we don't want to wait 32 years between games, 02, 34. We want to be doing this every 16 years from here on out. So how do we continue to adapt, and how do we build venues and infrastructure, or more broadly, our own readiness? How do we keep that readiness up? So we can host in 2050 and 2066, and I can't do the math after that. So a few quick comments about some of the specific items just mentioned. So in Peter's case, we're actually trying this out, storing snow at Soldier Hollow. So you can actually drive out there and have a look. It's a pilot program to see if we can store, so they run around and collected a bunch of the snow, I'm not sure which week in spring, covered it up. And the idea is that, in the fall, then that can go and be the base layer for the trails and some of that. So we are trying some of that. These are the things we need to experiment with, get better with, work with our ski resort partners and others to figure out what are the best snowmaking methods, what are the most efficient, both from an electricity and a water perspective. And how can we be cutting edge, and how can we use the games to drive some of that so that we can continue to adapt and be resilient. So let's see. I'd love to, by the way, explore the convergence of cloud seeding and artistry. I think there's probably something. Not sure what that is, but particularly around your radar comments. So this is also a really important year for us to look at what are the priorities for us to host the games from an infrastructure perspective. So, we're mostly probably thinking about the boring stuff, like how to move people around. So what do we need to do in Kimball Junction, or, what roads need fixed or whatever. But things like radar, those are really potentially important investments that we could make. We just don't know about them. So this is the year to tell us. Because what we can then do is use the games as a catalyst for those things to happen. So, and then otherwise, I just would like to say, yeah, we would love to continue to hear your ideas. We have some significant sustainability commitments that we've made through the bid process. So unlike in 2002, which, we did good things, but, and we have a very strong living legacy from that, we want to be much more intentional around this, in this space. We have a significant commitment around our own carbon footprint, and so we are either going to reduce, mitigate, or offset, or do something to make sure that the event itself, the games themselves, don't negatively impact two things. Most importantly, our air. And then I'd say the other signature project that we are aligning with is around the Great Salt Lake and the preservation of the Great Salt Lake. So those are a few things.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much for jumping in there. So unfortunately, we're really out of time, but if the panelists are willing to stick around, please talk to, I think there are several sort of hands itching to go up. So please join me in thanking the panelists again. I needed to cut it off because we actually have a finishing session, the last session in Donkey, which is the room right by the registration. We will announce the winners of the student prizes and have closing remarks. Thank you.